This is 7.8 Peripheral Nervous System Notes. The essential question is, where are the spinal and cranial nerves located, and what are the functions of the cranial nerves? Peripheral nervous system is made up of 31 pairs of spinal nerves and 12 pairs of cranial nerves. The spinal nerves come off the spinal cord, and the cranial nerves come off the brain, the underside of the brain. Most of the nerves of the peripheral nerve systems are mixed nerves, which means they have the sensory portion and motor portion. Sensory, remember, is afferent, which means that it is going toward the central nervous systems, and the motor is information that is going away from the central nervous system, or it's efferent. The spinal nerves are named because they are attached to the spinal cord via the ventral and the dorsal roots, which are nerves that are directly coming off the spinal cord. And the spinal nerve is the connection between the central nervous system and the rest of the body. Posterior or dorsal root is a branch off of the back side of the spinal cord, and it contains sensory information, which is information going into the spinal cord and up to the brain. And they contain a structure called a dorsal root ganglion, which is a bulge in the dorsal root, the reason why it bulges is because it has a collection of cell bodies of neurons. So it's basically a connection between two neurons before it goes into the spinal cord. The anterior or ventral root is the branch that's coming off the front side of the spinal cord, and it contains motor information. So any information leaving the spinal cord travels down the anterior or the ventral root. And there is no ventral root ganglion because it does not synapse near the spinal cord. Here is a picture of the dorsal root, and any information going into the spinal cord goes through the dorsal root. And the way you can tell the dorsal root from the ventral root is because it has this bulge here. That bulge is the dorsal root ganglion, which is a connection of cell bodies. So remember, cell bodies are the receiving end of information. So any kind of information coming into the neuron will come through the cell body. So it's where the synapse is. Remember, synapse is a junction. So it is a stop-off point for two neurons. It will stop off here, and then the new neuron will exit and go into the spinal cord. Any information going out leaves through the ventral root, and notice that there is no ventral root ganglion. And so motor, meaning that information is leaving. Where the dorsal root and the ventral root come together right here, this is the spinal nerve. That's why spinal nerve is a mixed nerve, because it has a sensory portion and it has a motor portion. Cranial nerves are directly attached to the underside of the brain, and there are 12 of them, and they're named according to the most anterior, and it works backwards to the most posterior. So you need to know the number and the name of the cranial nerves, and whether it's sensory or motor or both, and also what their function is. So cranial nerve number 1 is olfactory, which means that it is for sensory only, and it is for sense of smell. Cranial nerve number 2 is also purely sensory, and it's optic, which is for vision. Number 3, cranial nerve number 3 is called oculomotor, and it is purely motor, and it controls the eye muscles, and it controls the opening of the pupils. Cranial number 4 is called trochlear. It is purely also motor, and it controls the eye muscle. Number 5 is a mixed nerve, trigeminal. The motor portion is it controls the muscles that for chewing. Sensory is it allows for sensation of the face. So anything that is touching your face, you can feel it because of the cranial nerve number 5. Number 6, cranial number 6 is called abducen, and it is purely motor, and it controls the eye muscles. So cranial nerve number 3, 4, and 6, the oculomotor, trochlear, and abducen, they're all motor, and they control the eye muscles. Cranial number 7 is facial. It is a mixed nerve, meaning that it has sensory for taste, and it has the motor portion for controlling the muscles for facial expression. Cranial number 8 is called vestibulocochlear, and it is a sensory. It controls hearing, it senses hearing, and it also helps with balance and equilibrium. So if your cranial nerve 8 is not working properly, then you're going to have problems with dizziness and things like that. Cranial number 9 is glossopharyngeal. It is motor to the salivary glands of the mouth. It produces and secretes saliva. And the sensory portion is for taste. So cranial nerve number 7 and cranial number 9 is the sensory portion is for both for taste. And they also regulate blood pressure and proprioception, which means that it controls the kind of like balance and how much your muscles will stretch, and it also controls swallowing. So cranial nerve 9 is it's a mixed nerve because it has a motor and sensory. Cranial number 10 is called the vagus nerve, and it is a mixed nerve. It is motor to the muscle of the digestive system, specifically your stomach, and your heart, lung, and it has sensory portion that controls your organs dealing with digestion also. So when you feel queasy and you feel like you're throwing up, or when you vomit, that's your vagus nerve. Cranial number 11 is the accessory, and it is a mixed nerve. It's motor for swallowing, and sensory is proprioception, which is kind of like balance again. Kind of proprioception is kind of like knowing whether you're upside down or when you're laying sideways. A body position is what proprioception is. Cranial number 12 is hypoglossal, is movement of the tongue. It is the motor portion of the tongue. So taste is sensory, feeling the sense of taste, but the movement of the tongue is dependent on cranial number 12 and swallowing. So you got 2 cranial nerves for swallowing, the accessory and the hypoglossal, and then also sensory is proprioception. So cranial number 12 is also a mixed nerve. Here's a general diagram of the names of the cranial nerves and where they're located, and notice that cranial number 1 is the most anterior and cranial number 12 is the most posterior, and they kind of go in order. So again, cranial number 1 is your olfactory, cranial number 2 is your optic nerve, cranial number 3 is your oculomotor, cranial number 4 is trochlear, cranial number 5 is trigeminal, cranial number 6 is abducen, cranial number 7 is your facial, cranial nerve number 8 is vestibulocochlear, cranial number 9 is your glossopharyngeal, cranial nerve number 10 is your vagus nerve, cranial number 11 is your accessory, and your cranial nerve number 12 is hypoglossal. So you need to know the names, whether it's motor, sensory, or mixed, and also what their functions are. The coverings of the nerves, just like every other organ that we've talked about, remember the coverings are the serous membrane. Any organs that are not open to the exterior have coverings. So the most inner, the one that covers individual nerve cell, is called the endoneurium, and then perineurium covers the bundles of nerves called the fascicle, and then epineurium is what surrounds the entire nerve. 7.9 notes homework. Number 1, which cranial nerves are purely motor, purely sensory, and mixed? Number 2, which cranial nerves involve the eyes? Number 3, which cranial nerves involves the mouth?